So here we are, not dead yet. Anyone's died? Notice a space next to you? It's funny, it's like a joke, but it's true. If we all went around, there's a market, we went around with a survey in a 50-mile radius, a 5-kilometre radius. And you knock on a door and you say, "Good morning, madam, did anybody die last night who didn't expect to?" And I guarantee you'd have answers of yes. Isn't it? Not who's sick and dying and who expect, but who didn't expect to die. Okay, so if we did do that, we'd be serious. We would find people have died who didn't expect to. And of course, that's us. And why do we think that? Because as Lord Buddha says, one of the misconceptions deep in our bones that we totally believe is the truth, so totally spontaneous, so instinctive we don't even notice it, which is believing in permanent me. Why? Because we have so much attachment to me, we can't stand the thought of dying, right? So this is the point, this is what Buddha's saying. So, think, I'm still alive, in fact, and that means, my petrol tank of morality, my own petrol tank of my own past morality hasn't run out yet. This is incredible. So we think I mustn't waste today, as long as I'm living, as long as my breath keeps going in and out. We're going to listen to these teachings, think about the meaning so we can take them on board in our life to help us develop our amazing potential, to help us live our life well, so we can die well, so we can carry on our spiritual path. It's a practical issue, And then, of course, on the basis of this, we can help others. The most precious gift we can give others. Help them die well as well. So this reason we're together. Sangye charang soke chongnam la jangchu balu dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye dropa shok sangye charang soke chongnam la jangchu balu dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye dropa shok sangye charang soke chongnam la jangchu badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye dropa shok. Some of the merit of listening to the teachings. Chönyen. I say that even though I'm speaking, I'm listening too, believe me. But I always am grateful that people turn up. Because I always say I'd look silly talking to myself, wouldn't I? So I'm very grateful you're here. So I can talk about this stuff, so I can get it. And if there's a bonus and you get it too, well, I'm very happy. And there's some benefit. Okay. So is anybody who hasn't been here at all this week? Okay. So we're going to have to summarise what we've done all week, haven't we? Which is everything. So we'll just continue it this weekend. We'll do an overview again this weekend of the Buddhist teachings, basically. The two main things we've been talking about all week, the two main things we're talking about, which is exactly what we need to do to live our lives well, in order to die well, in order to carry on our spiritual path and then get a decent human life and carry on, is to understand the mind and understand the law of karma. This is it. This is it. This is everything in Buddhism, actually. It's in that. The Buddhist model of the mind, and then the way karma works. And so karma is this word that so many people have so many weird ideas about, actually. And even most Buddhists, we have these really cliched ideas, superficial, cliched ideas about karma. But basically, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama said one time, it's like self-creation. You've got the materialist view that says your mother and father made you, and all of modern science and all of the modern views of the mind are based on that assumption. And then you have the religious views, which are usually creator. And even though the Hindus, all you amazing Indians, have karma, you also have the view, there's a source, kind of God, Buddha doesn't have this. He's got this third option. You're not the handiwork of a creator, nor are we the handiwork of our mummy and daddy, which is a big surprise. Which doesn't mean mummy and daddy don't play a big fat role. Of course they do. But we come into this life from the first second of conception programmed with all our own tendencies, with our own humanity that we created from the cause to even get in the first place. All the karmic seeds of whom we're going to meet and how they're going to treat us, and even the way the environment impacts upon us. We are the boss. This is what I like to say most of all. We are the boss, not Buddha. This is the most fundamental difference. Buddhism on the face of it looks like other religions. I mean, look at this stuff. I'm a nun. Look at the images. I mean, they don't have this much even in my Catholic upbringing. Catholics are pretty religious. This leaves the Catholics for dead, I promise you. But the fundamental difference with Buddhism is there's no creator. There's no boss except us. This is the shock. This is a fact. I mean, Buddhism doesn't say so bluntly. It's good to hear it bluntly, because we love to make it all holy, you know. So Buddha's not a creator. He doesn't assert a creator. He was a regular guy who became an enlightened being. And all he does is lay out his methodology and what Buddhism is since that time, coming through the mouths, in this case, from all the holy Tibetans for the last 1,000-something years, more than that, 1,200 years. From that, the amazing Indians, the Nalanda tradition, as His Holiness always points out. All the teachings that I'm describing in this room are coming from the Nalanda tradition, from His Holiness, my lamas, going back and back through all the Indians, back to Lord Buddha, you know. So Buddha's not a creator. He doesn't assert a creator. We don't need creating. And this is also the view of karma, but it's also the view of emptiness, which I want to talk about this weekend as well, because all of the teachings we've discussed so far about the mind, about karma, how things work, who we are, what is negative, what is positive, what is happiness, what is suffering, the realms of existence, all of this, the stuff of Buddha's metaphysics, Buddha's psychology, Buddha's philosophy, it leads to emptiness. It leads to the final point. This is where Buddha diverged from the Indians, from the Hindus, you know. Well, the Indians, the Hindus, those views about the self. That's where he diverged. From there, Buddhism developed. And even within the Buddhists, there are many different interpretations of this idea of what is a self and what is not. This is all, where everything leads to that. This is Buddha's unique one, his view about the way, finally, about what a person is, what is a self, how it exists. Everything leads to this one. So we'll discuss this. So far, all this week as well, and now still, we're just still discussing, you know, the wisdom wing. I like that analogy a lot. Buddha's teachings all fit into the two wings. The bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. Compassion wing is where you put your money where your mouth is and you help others. That's the Bodhisattva path. That's the Mahayana teachings. How you put this stuff into practice. But as His Holiness says, compassion is the point, but it's not enough. You've got to have wisdom. And this is all the nuts and bolts of what we've talked about all week. Mind and karma, which we'll talk about here. All of which is telling us how to live our lives in order to die well. So the central point, as I mentioned, in Lama Zopa Rinpoche's book, which you can download, you look at page 2, you'll see the link. You can download it for free from the FPMT. You'll see it. Some of the teachings in this book. You haven't got your course notes. Where's Saptan? Please hand people course notes. Those who've not been here before, grab them. There you go. So you'll see on page, some of the teachings in these course notes are from Lama Zopa's book, which is the basis of our teachings. And if you look on page 2, you'll see the link where you can download this book for free. Wisdom, as it mentions on here, Wisdom Publications published another version of it, and they've called it How to Enjoy Death. But the one that was first done, which is the manuscript I edited, and which you can download for free, is How to Help Your Loved Ones Enjoy Death and Go Happily to the Next Rebirth, which is what I call these notes, okay? So some of the notes here are from that book, but the book itself is about 400 and something pages. Two-thirds of the book are the actual practices, numbered from 1 to 87. All these different practices that Rinpoche mentions that are useful at the different stages of a person's dying and death and after death, which is what we've been discussing, you know. So the two things we've been talking about. One is how to live your life so that when death does come, it's easy peasy and you can die and say bye-bye and you'll keep moving and everything will be fine. Which is living your life according to the laws of morality, accepting the reality of impermanence, getting in touch with this, letting go of attachment. So death is something easy. And then secondly, how to therefore help others. And the book, of course, is referenced in relation to helping others. You know, it's a good way of presenting all the information. Okay. So the Buddha's view is our consciousness, our mind. These words are virtually used synonymously in Buddhism, broadly speaking. Our mind, our consciousness. Number one, it is not physical. It is not a function of our brain. Doesn't mean the brain isn't a marvelous instrument that plays a great role. But, you know, and if we're only familiar with the scientific view, this is a bit confusing initially. And equally, it's a bit confusing if you believe in a soul, you know. There's a third part of you, body, mind, and soul. Buddha doesn't talk like that. He says we've got a body and a mind. So mind is the word used to refer to our thoughts, feelings, emotions, unconscious, subconscious, instinct, intuition, entire spectrum of our inner being. This is our mind, not physical. It is not the handiwork of a creator. It is not the handiwork of our mummy and daddy. It is not a function of anything physical. It exists interdependently with the brain and the body. That's clear. But itself is not those things. That's the crucial point to get used to. So if it's not the handiwork of someone else, the obvious question is, where do I come from? Where does my mind come from? Well, it's a beginningless continuity of mental moments, basically. You know, you can't find a first moment because of the law of cause and effect. This moment of something has to come from a previous moment of something like that. This moment of our consciousness, which is not physical, its cause is the previous moment, the previous millisecond of this consciousness. And what was the cause of that previous millisecond was, guess what? The previous millisecond. And you will never find a first one. We always assume there must be. The commonest question we all ask is, where did it begin? Where did I begin? Where did my mind begin? Where did karma begin? Where did suffering begin? It's a misconception. It's a wrong question, Buddha says. What do you want a beginning for? It's a very weird idea to us. So our consciousness is not only beginningless, it's also endless. So in the Buddhist teachings, we're going to find out, if we go to Theravadan countries, you're going to learn when you've achieved your nirvana, when you've achieved the wisdom wing, when you've finished the wisdom wing, and you die, you're gone, you're finished. There's not one atom of your consciousness left. So there's big differences even in the interpretations of Buddhist teachings around the world. The Mahayana view says, no, your consciousness is endless. It's beginningless, endless. Just the way it is, he says. No one made it this way. So that's generally, the mind is not physical. It's a term that we use to refer to everything inside us. Thoughts, feelings, emotions, unconscious, subconscious. Virtue, non-virtue, insanity, psychosis, compassion, empathy. All of this is our consciousness. Not the handiwork of anybody else. This is the crucial piece to get. So the main cause of what's ever in my mind, this is now the view of karma, this law of cause and effect simply. Every millisecond of what our mind does is a karma, and it leaves a seed in the mind that will stay there dynamically and will then be nourished by, because it's a very dynamic process, then eventually that will ripen, as we've been describing in the week, in the future, in 4 ways. 1, our type of rebirth, human, animal, whatever. 2, our tendencies. 3, our experiences at the hands of others. 4, even the way the physical world impacts upon us. There are 4 ways, very simple way to express it. 4 ways our past actions ripen in the present. So we're the boss. We're the main cause of everything is our past action. There are secondary causes, many, many complicated secondary conditions, all of which have to come together in this dependent arising scenario. But the main one is always the past action. This is the simple point that Buddha is making, which is such a shock to us because instinctively we don't think this. And all the scientific model would never suggest this. There's no view like that. So the implication of this immediately is I'm responsible and that I can change. That's what gives us confidence, optimism, courage to own what's in there because it's mine. I created it. It's not a complicated concept. It's kind of liberating if we can hear it properly. So the fundamental point that Buddha's making with karma is that, it's all framed in terms of happiness and suffering. If you look at the universe and you observe the behaviour of ants and dogs and monkeys and humans, we can deduce pretty quickly that every one of them is driven by the wish to be happy and driven by the wish to avoid suffering. It's one of Buddha's points. It's obvious. You can see it. It's natural. So then all Buddha's teachings are in relation to happiness and suffering. So he says that virtuous actions are the cause of happiness. Non-virtuous actions are the cause of suffering. This is a natural law. There's no concept of punishment and reward. There's no one up there pulling the strings. There's no one up there running the show. There's no judger. There's no rewarder. There's no punisher. Not like that. Not for the Buddha. It's a natural law. So that's the case. We have to know clearly what is a negative action, what's a positive one. That's very obvious. You have to deduce that. What is a negative action? Because you don't want to do them, do you? Because you don't want suffering, do you? Pretty clear. What's a positive action? We want to do those, so we want happiness. Pretty simple. This is the wisdom wing. We're not discussing compassion yet, it's too advanced. So a negative action, the most obvious level of a negative action is an action that you do with your body or your speech, or both, but driven by what's in your mind. The mind is what creates karma. Everything exists on the tip of the wish, is the way Lama Zopa Rinpoche puts it. It starts with a thought. This is the view of karma. But so much of what we do and say and think is spontaneous, is programmed, because we've done it so often we don't notice there's intention there. Intention is the very meaning of the word karma. Intention. I will. So, an action of body and speech, an action of the body, for example, that is called killing. This is called a negative action. And it's called negative first because sentient beings don't like getting killed. It's not a sin, as the Catholics would put it, because God said. That's the Christian teaching. And it's not a naughty action because Mummy said, which is the materialist one. Mummy said, Daddy said, the judge says, the police say, they say, the world expects. That's our usual view of what's wrong, what's bad. That's why we try to avoid it, because we don't want to get judged, There's no judgment here. You do it to yourself. So the Buddha would say, first of all, the main level of negative actions he exhorts us to refrain from at the first stages of practice are the actions that harm others. Why? Because if an action that is negative is one, first of all, is one that's an action that harms another. If you're a Christian, it's an action that God says you shouldn't do. There's a massive difference. In your mummy's house, it's an action that mummy says you shouldn't do. This is not what determines it here. Buddha's just a messenger. He's like a doctor that tells you you'll get cancer if you smoke. He's not saying, I will give you cancer if you smoke. No. He's suggesting that you could. So he's advising us. Buddha's like that. But here, what he's advising is, he says, killing isn't bad because it harms others. But, he says, he recommends we don't do it first for our own sake. First, for our own sake. Because guess what, Robina? It's going to harm you, honey. By doing that action of killing the mouse, based on the intention I will kill, based on the motivation, how dare that mouse be in my kitchen, which is called aversion, I then do the action. That's a complete action of killing, determined by my anger. That's what puts the seed in the mind and then develops the habit to keep killing. It ripens as my own suffering, my habit to kill, etc., etc. A type of lower realm rebirth, the experience of being killed or being sick, etc. Buddha says we create all our own experiences. So the conscious intentional action of non-killing in exactly the same way. That's a virtuous action. Sentient beings liked not being harmed. But when you do the action of intentionally not killing that mouse, your hand picks up the mouse. You have intention, I will save the mouse. Your compassion is your motivation. You do the action, you pick up the mouse and you release it. Altogether, that's a very powerful, virtuous action. A conscious, intentional, virtuous action based on compassion. That sows seeds in your mind that will ripen as long life, as not being killed, a human life. There's some kind of almost intuitively some logic to this, If all actions bring their own results. So this is like learning Buddhist botany. You know the fruits you want, you know the weeds you don't want, so you know what seeds not to plant and what seeds to plant. It's kind of obvious. That's karma, This is the basis of practice. The basis. Fundamental. And it's done by the mind. So mind and karma totally go together. Karma plays out in minds. It's not some kind of big stick that's used by somebody else to beat you, which is how we think about it. No, it's just a word referring to what our mind does, which produces its own results. And so we're in charge. We need to be in charge of this process. We have to do it. So basically, living your life like this, knowing at the time of death you don't want the negative seeds to ripen because that'll send you into a suffering rebirth and you don't want that, then you live your life well. It's kind of obvious. You don't want a bellyache, you don't eat the wrong food. It's very clear. Same here. So then the more we understand this, the more we'll have some self-respect, some dignity, some authenticity. We'll have to know our mind well, because we've got to police ourselves every second for our own sake. Then we can see others. We can go to the compassion wing. We can have compassion for others. We'll discuss this later. So when it comes to the time of death, if we live our life like this, understanding impermanence, knowing that death is definite, knowing I don't know when I'm going to die, knowing that at the time of death, the only thing that's important is the virtuous imprints in my mind, this is clear enough that will produce a really good life. We'll be in charge of our life, we'll live a good life, we won't get afraid of death, we'll be confronting it when it comes, we'll welcome it, die well, and at the time of death, as we've been discussing, a virtuous karmic seed will be triggered that will program our consciousness to take a decent rebirth, so we can keep on moving on our spiritual path. So why death is so important, as Rinpoche says. Death is important only because it happens, it's natural, but because we're so afraid of it, mainly because we're so attached to me and mine, we can't bear the thought of dying. So we live in denial, clearly. So by confronting it and accepting the fact of dying, it's so intelligent, so practical, then there's no fear. If you live in denial, you're totally terrified of that driving test in 2 months' time. You'll live in denial of it's coming, and then by the time it comes, you will not have practiced, and you'll have a nightmare. Of course you will. It'll be terrible. So stop living in denial of it. Start practicing driving now. Then when it comes, you'll be easy. It'll be easy. Same with death. So it's so practical. Death is natural. The only reason death is fearful is because we have attachment. So that means that's why we have to understand the mind. What we've talked all week, and let's do it again now. Attachment. So using this Buddhist model of the mind, as I said, it's come from you amazing Indians 500 years before the Buddha. These great yogis who developed this marvelous technique of focusing the mind at subtler levels, and thus mapped their own mind. Not the brain, the cognitive process itself. And this is the same model that we're discussing right this second, 3,000 years old. Kind of interesting. So, the key thing we have to understand about our mind then, if we're going to sort our lives out and try and be virtuous and not be harmful, we have to control our body and speech, which is our behaviour. We have to know what runs our body and speech, which is our mind. Clear. So, the Buddhist model is deceptively simple, I promise. It's deceptively simple. It's easy, it's simple intellectually, intensely hard to unpack and unravel and really become familiar with the workings of our own mind. That really takes time. But it's not complicated. There are three: there's the sensory consciousness, and we have mental consciousness. We have sensory consciousness, and we have mental consciousness. When you study Buddhist psychology, like you study the epistemological model, which is the way the mind works, and in itself, this is utterly fascinating. The Buddhist teachings on this are utterly fascinating, I tell you. Then there's a psychological model, the contents of our mind. So the first one is the way the mind functions, and they've got 2 levels: sensory and mental. This already is really gives us real insight into the way we suffer in life, and we understand this, and this leads us to understand emptiness, which we'll get to later. So for example, I might say, this is the example I use these days, I might say, in fact I wouldn't say, what a pretty cup. I wouldn't say that. Just if you ask my taste, do you understand my point? These cute little strawberries, look at them. So let's just say, I say, oh, what a pretty cup. Do you understand? So we can all be forgiven for thinking, can't we? That when I look over in this direction and I go, what a pretty cup, we can all be forgiven for thinking that my eyes see a pretty cup. The Buddha says, don't be ridiculous. In fact, the senses, and this is already incredibly telling, helping us understand the way the mind works. It's very fascinating, this. You'll see immediately. The sensory consciousnesses, as they call them, and that means, to be precise, to be wordy about it, that part of our mind, which is not physical, that functions through the medium of the eyelid being open, the eyeballs, the nerves, as we'd say, the ear consciousness, touch consciousness, smell and taste, the 5 senses. The 5 sense consciousnesses are themselves not physical. That's part of our mind, remember the Buddha's view. But they function through the medium of all the physical bits, right? We get that. But these sensory consciousnesses, for the Buddhist view, are like dumb animals. They're profoundly limited in their capacity for cognition. The job of your mind is to cognize. It's the verb. The verb to cognize, the verb to be aware, the verb to know. These are synonyms in Buddhist psychology. That's the job of your mind. When you define something, this is also helping us understand emptiness too. First, if we want to discuss something, we have to each be on the same page, right? So if I say to you, I say to my mummy, "Mummy, what's that?" And she'll say, "Well, darling, that's a cup." Then she'll explain to me, she'll give me the definition, which means it has two parts. The first part tells you its characteristics, its conventional characteristics. It's this flat-bottomed clay container. She'll explain those words to me. That tells me its conventional characteristics, and from this I can recognize. But I'm not happy yet. I need the second part of the definition. But Mummy, what does it do? What's its job? What's its function? And then in order to understand emptiness, which we'll get to, this is a really crucial point. This is fundamental. So, "Oh, sweetheart," she'll tell me, "it'll hold my tea." This is called establishing something as existing, establishing something conventional. Okay? But I shouldn't believe her. We believe anything anyone will tell us, because we think everything's just belief, we never question. But I should get her to prove that. This is how you establish something as existing. So what she'll do is she'll get her tea, and she'll do like this. She'll pour. And then I will see, oh, it fits the definition. It holds her tea. She just proved it. But still not enough, as His Holiness says. You've got to now establish that there's no other understanding in the world as we know it that contradicts that definition. So eventually that is the way you establish something as existing. And now we can proceed to discuss it, which is what we have to do when we try to understand emptiness, which is understanding how things exist, finally. So anyway, back to the cup. Mummy just, I see this thing. So now, that's that, how you establish something. So now, the mind, the definition of mind, this is by the way now, it's got two parts. The first part tells you its conventional characteristics. And that's conveyed by the simple term, the first part of the definition. It's clarity or clear. Don't get all holy about that. It just means it's not physical. It's not physical. It's not substantial. The first part of the definition is that which is clear. But then the second part tells you its job. It's that which cognizes. It's that which knows. It's that which is aware. These bare bones verbs, they're all synonymous, and that's the job, that's the function of your mind. Well, incidentally, the next question should be, if you're a kid, well, cognize what, Mummy? Well, guess what Buddha says? That which exists, baby. That's the job of our mind, to eventually cognize that which exists. That's called, finally, when you've got it, it's called omniscience. Knowing that which exists without mistake. That's the underlying point in all of Buddha's teachings. To see that which exists. So this is now telling us about the way the mind works. Okay, that's the definition of mind. Now, back to this. I say, what a pretty cup. We can be forgiven for thinking, can't we, that my eye consciousness, or even my eyes, are seeing a pretty cup. And this is surely the way we understand the world. We're living in this world. We experience the world through our sensory consciousnesses. Tasting, touching, smelling, seeing, hearing every millisecond. So as Lama Yeshe puts it, we make the body the boss, But from the Buddhist perspective, completely mistaken, profoundly mistaken, totally mistaken conception. It's not like that. And you'll see it immediately. It's totally fascinating. So the eye consciousness can only cognize two things. It only has the capability of cognizing two things. Shape and colour. They are the object of eye consciousness. They don't even know the names for them yet. They're just bare bones. Ear consciousness can only cognize the phenomenon called sound. Tactile consciousness can only cognize, soft, rough, etc. They're really profoundly limited. This is so, you'll hear it, so insightful in the way, understanding the way Buddhism describes the mind. And therefore telling us how we are led up garden paths all day by our ridiculous senses. We make them the boss. This is the physical, this is the scientific world. There is only the body. This is the point here. Now, what does Buddha say? It's very simple. You listen. What happens is this. And I love this analogy. What will happen is this. My eye consciousness goes over here, cognizes this shape and colour. And then in a millisecond, what it does, quicker than Google, and I mean this sincerely, it accesses my mental consciousness. They point here. That's where all my thoughts are, all my ideas, all my viewpoints, all my memories, all my happiness, all my suffering, all the causes of suffering, all the causes of happiness. This is where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa puts it. Everything is stored there. And as I've been talking in the week, which is so fascinating, the Buddha's view is there's not a millisecond of anything any sentient being ever experiences that ever disappears. It all stays in the mind, which is why in the long term we can have clairvoyance. It's very logical. Everything is stored there. It's just that normally speaking in our daily life we're as thick as posts and we don't remember 99% of anything. We just kind of, remember a few vague thoughts. But it's all stored there. So we can see that. It's quicker than Google. What is accessed is all my thoughts that have all been over my life, what I've deduced is what's wrong? What's happening? What?
We have a little kid here who's talking to his mother.
Oh, that's all right. Okay. So then, my Google, everything is stored. And I really mean this work stuff, if you start to study Buddhist psychology, the epistemological model, the way that mental consciousness functions, it's beyond fascinating, beyond more genius, more quick than any computer you could ever imagine. Really and truly, the conceptual processing, and that's come from you amazing Indians 3,000 years ago. You sorted it out. You saw it first. And the Buddhist psychology takes that and works with it, It's amazing. It's fascinating. The cognitive process itself. So all this stuff's stored there. All my memories are stored. My taste, that I know that it's a cup, what I like. This one, strawberries, leaves, this one, cup, the shape, the design, the colour. All this, my preferences are stored in my mental consciousness. And all that's accessed, as I said, in a millisecond. There's not even a second where I go, oh. Then you have to think, do I like it? No. Right there. Out comes the opinion. Wow. And that's the point. What's in the mental consciousness, this is where the workshop is. This is where Lord Buddha's expertise, knowing the contents of our mental consciousness and learning to unpack and unravel it. This is what being a Buddhist is. So all the contents of this consciousness of ours, we can divide them, all these thoughts, billions of thoughts. We can divide them into 3 categories. There's no fourth. So simple. It's embarrassing. Those that are negative, neurotic, delusional, distorted, disturbing, afflictions, all these words we read. These are called the negative states of mind. The second category are called the positive states of mind. I mean, it's so cute, these words, Virtuous, reasonable, beneficial, useful, relatively reasonable states of mind. And the third category, I like to call them the mechanics of the mind. Like concentration, good memory, these things that anybody, whether you're good or bad, need. The term mindfulness, for example, which is really misconceived these days and used for a certain type of meditation, which is fine, but the bare bones meaning of mindfulness is one of the third category, which is called neutral states of mind, meaning neither virtuous in their nature nor non-virtuous in their nature. It's merely mindfulness is literally the capacity to not forget what you're doing from moment to moment. That's it. We know that one. You think, oh, I'll have a piece of cake. And then you go halfway through the kitchen, someone distracts you, then you go, oh, what was I doing? Well, that's because you haven't got good mindfulness, which means you've lost your memory that moment. You forgot what you were doing. We know that one. That's so simple. That's mindfulness. Well, as Lama Zopa points out, thieves need mindfulness. Pretty obvious. So it's not a virtue in its nature. Got to understand the point of this third category of states of mind. They're the mechanics of the mind. I put it that way. And there's so many of these that, unless they're working properly, would be an insane person. There's so many of these, and it's marvellous to study it. But they're called neutral because they're not in their character virtuous, and not in their character deluded or non-virtuous. But they're crucial, necessary states of mind. And these are what are honed to astonishing perfection in the concentration meditation. This amazing technique these Indian yogis created 3,000 years ago. So, what goes then, the point is to learn to understand our mental consciousness. This is being, as Lama Yeshe puts it, being our own therapist. He's not kidding. That's the job of being a Buddhist. That's when you actually become a Buddhist. The first level of practice, like we talked over the week, if we take this, if we look at Tsongkhapa, our 14th century lineage Lama, must be some pictures of him somewhere. We're Gelugpa in this room, our teachers are Gelug. Tsongkhapa is our lineage Lama, or as we'd say in the Christian world, our patron saint, Tsongkhapa. He took Atisha's teachings. Atisha is an amazing Indian yogi scholar saint who in the 11th century or something, he came to Tibet, spent the last 15, 18 years of his life there. And so he'd spent many years in Indonesia, in Sumatra, with his guru Serlingpa. It seemed like Vajrayana Buddhism was flourishing in Indonesia. There's still this place where you go now. I went there a couple of retreats in Borobudur. And the United Nations has funded the restoration of this astonishing, vast Vajrayana mandala, like a stupa. Still not many Buddhist tourists go there. It's kind of interesting. The Indonesian government spent millions on it, or the UN has anyway. It's a gorgeous place. Well, Atisha spent many years there in Java and then further down to Sumatra. So he spent a year travelling from India to Sumatra, where he spent years and years with his guru. And that's where he received all the teachings on bodhicitta, on the teachings on on Lojong. So anyway, Atisha got back to India, then he was invited to Tibet, and he spent the last years of his life there. So what he did was, he could see that Buddhism had been flourishing in Tibet for several hundred years, since Buddha Rinpoche, So he kind of energized things, and he figured that the teachings were all there, flourishing, but no real coherent overview. So he took all the main points from all the vast literature, going back to Lord Buddha, but particularly through the filter of the Nalanda tradition, the Mahayana tradition of all the great yogis like Shantideva, all the rest, Chandrakirti, Nagarjuna, all these people. And he took all the essential points of Buddha's teachings and he presented them in a really simple way, from 2 points of view, in an orderly way. So when you learn something, you learn music, you learn cooking, we all know that you go and do a course. And we know the information is presented very kindly by the musicians and the cooks in a nice orderly way, orderly in terms of your capacity to internalize the information. We get that. As soon as you say the word, I'm going to do a course, I'm going to do a course at university, a 4-year course in music. We understand exactly. You learn the easy stuff and you progress, don't you? So that's, okay, Tsongkhapa called it the Lam Rim. So, you Tibetans, if there are any Tibetans here, you can hear that term. But when I heard it first in English, I thought, gradual path? What's that, how boring. Well, it's a 14th century, nice, 14th century concept. So then I hear the word in English, a course. I go, oh, I get it. The second you say a course in English, I instantaneously get it. But it took me years to understand that, gradual path. I mean, what's a gradual path? Well, think of it. Grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, and then you graduate. Oh, I get it. That's a gradual path. Well, I prefer to call it a course. And then Tsongkhapa divided it into 3 categories. The first one, and as Lama Zopa, because he respects the lineage, and this is what's so marvellous, but it's like 14th century, he says the first, they call it the first scope. So the first level of teachings are called the teachings and practices suitable for the disciple of the lowest capability. Well, you know what? I prefer to call it junior school. Oh, I get it. I'll go when I say that. It's very correct to call it what Rinpoche does. Then you go, the middle scope is the teachings and practices suitable for the student of the middle capability. And then you've got the great scope, etc. Well, I call them, and as His Holiness said one time, I felt so good, he said it's like the education system. It is. So when you hear it's a course, you've got junior school, high school, university. Go, oh, I get it. But what's interesting, by the way, we don't ever think of spiritual teachings like this. We just think, certainly in our culture, the Christian view, it's like one big glob of holy things and you kind of hope, you cross your fingers, you might get it. But if you take it as a course, it's incremental, it's gradual. Then when you realise that compassion is university, that's really a surprise to us, because we tend to think all religions are just all about compassion. That's more advanced. So this is where the 2 wings of the bird fit in. The wisdom wing is junior school and high school. That's the Theravadan teachings. That's the teachings that you would do if you were you achieve your own nirvana. your own liberation from suffering. You'd go to high school, you'd graduate at high school. That's the Theravada teachings. That's junior school and high school of the entire Mahayana path. So you do the first scope, the first junior school, control your body and speech. This is the essence of it. Abide by the laws of karma. And that's about body and speech. Behaviour is body and speech. It's not about the mind yet. Just back off, don't kill, don't lie, don't steal, don't this, don't that, you know. A series of little don'ts. Buddha exhorts us. So simple, already profound. If the world controlled their body and speech, what a blissful world it would be.